Alright, so I finished Trails of Cold Steel 1, and I really wanted to talk about it. And as you can see from the length of this video, I talked about it. I'm going to tell you how I'm going to structure this video in case you don't want to see certain parts or you want to see a specific part. So I split this video into 3 groups. 1 for people who want a spoiler-free review, 2 for people who have played Cold Steel 1 but not the older games, and 3 for people who have played every game in the series leading up to Cold Steel 1 but not past it, because I have not played CS2. So there will be timestamps and you can skip to whatever part you want to. So if you want to see the story and not the gameplay review or whatever, go ahead and do that. But without further ado, let's just get into it because this is a long video and there's a lot to talk about. Also, I just want to very quickly add that I want this video to be a discussion. So if you have a counterpoint, a story, an opinion, or a thought, just comment it. Because I don't want to just be on the soapbox the whole time and make this like an objective review. I just want to have fun and talk about the game. Because I really do enjoy this series and I want to talk about it with more people. So let's start with the gameplay first. So the gameplay in this game is more or less the same as the crossbow games, except they kind of simplified the orbment or the magic system in this game. So in the older games, you would have, I guess the crossbow games, you would have this master quartz, which they actually improved upon from the crossbow games in this game. So they have more effects, and I think that in this game they give you actual arts. I don't remember if the old game and the crossbow games they gave you an art. You can level them up, as you can see. So I have this one maxed out on Elliot, and it gives you a ton more arts too and actual stats. So the master quartz system is really cool in this game compared to the old games, but the regular quartz is what they simplified. So the regular quartz now either just give you outright stats and like no skills, or they give you like just the skill itself. And there's no negative to adding a quartz in this game. So the old game, what you would do is you would have to balance which type, I guess, you'd have. So if you had 3 reds, you would get a specific art. So if I had 3 reds on here, I would get, for example, let's just say I would get a Purgatorial Flame. This game, you can just have this one quartz on here, and they'll give you Purgatorial Flame. So it's a simplification that I don't know whether or not I like or dislike. The old games kind of had a puzzle aspect to it where you could, you know, you would have to balance everything, and you couldn't just get these strong arts just by equipping one. But I don't know, I don't really feel any kind of way about it. It's not a positive or negative. I will say that this game, it's super easy to get strong because of this. Because I'm playing on Nightmare right now. Like, this is my New Game Plus Nightmare run. And these characters are super strong with just stuff I had at the end of New Game. Like, I carried myself from the end of New Game to Nightmare with more or less the same build. I didn't have to change anything. I think the only issue I had with this game from a gameplay perspective was how often they force you to re-equip your characters. Characters come and go in this game so often, and every time they leave and come back, you have to re-equip their orbments and their accessories, which was pretty annoying. So I feel like the link system that was added in Cold Steel 1 was pretty cool from a gameplay and a story perspective, but I kept constantly forgetting that it was a mechanic in the game that I had to remember to apply. So like, I had to constantly be reminded to actually link my characters together, to the point where I had to print out a picture and put it on my wall to remember to link my characters up. From a story aspect, I liked the link system, but it was kind of frustrating when characters just couldn't link together from a gameplay standpoint just because they hated each other. And it was a key point at least twice, I want to say. It was kind of annoying, especially if I didn't like the characters, and it kind of felt forced for the sake of story and character development. But it felt kind of weird when they just randomly decided to, hey, now we're gonna be friends because the gameplay calls for it. We're in the dungeon and this is the part where you guys have to be friends to link together. So I felt like that aspect in a way was kind of predictable. But overall with the gameplay, I'm glad that they decided to try new things and streamline the experience for new players, because this is mainly me just comparing this game to the old games. I don't really have any problems with any of this, and I feel like if they just made a few quality of life tweaks, it would be a lot more enjoyable. But overall, I really enjoyed the gameplay. Alright, next we gotta make my boy Elliot proud, and we gotta talk about the music. So, sad to say, unfortunately, CS1 had no bangers on it. I didn't find a single song on here that I immediately went and added to my playlist like I usually do with these games. Like the intro, like that one was good. But outside of that, And the battle theme, I guess, and some of the town themes and like the casual themes were alright, but the whole soundtrack was just not very memorable. Like, there was no Silver Will, there was no getting over the barrier, there was no inevitable struggle, no Hoshino Arika. Overall, I felt like it was very safe, very cozy, I guess. It wasn't bad, it was just nothing stood out to me like the older games did. But I will say though that I really enjoyed whenever they did musical callbacks, especially when Misty sung Whereabouts of Light. That, man, that was beautiful. It had me freaking out when I saw that. Alright, so now we're going to talk about characters, and I have a lot to say. I think this is my biggest criticism with this game. For the most part, I'm not going to talk about Class 7 as a whole. I think I'm going to have a whole different video on that, but I do want to talk about their internal interactions with the actual party. So, Class 7 as a whole, like the main cast that you play as, they don't ever talk amongst each other. Like, they only talk to Reen, and you rarely see them talk with each other. So like, for example, Reen will talk to, say, Elliot, but Elliot will never talk to Laura. Same thing with the other characters. And I also noticed that outside of field missions, assignments, or the classroom, the male characters will almost never talk to the female characters, which I guess is kind of true of high school life in real life. There were some times where I would see them outside in the school, and they would be talking to each other, but sometimes I would just be like, what are they even talking about? Because I just couldn't fathom that. Like, for example, Fee and Gaius were sitting down and talking one time, and I was like, I have no idea what they could be talking about right now. And I wish that that was something they built up more, because the previous games in the series had really good inter-party connections where they would actually talk to each other and have actual interactions with each other outside of the main characters. And it was interesting to think about what they were talking about, whereas here it's like, what could Fee and Gaius even be talking about? I think a big reason for this is because anytime there's downtime in the game, most of the Class 7 members go straight to their club or to their dedicated NPC friend and only interact with them. So for example, Laura will almost exclusively talk to Monica, the girl she's coaching, and they'll only really do that. They won't ever sit down and talk to the other playable characters. And if they're not doing that, they'll most likely be alone. There were a few times where they would be with someone else, but 9 times out of 10, they were either going to be alone in the club with someone else, or just waiting for Reen to initiate a bonding event. You very rarely got to see the Class 7 members just interacting with each other without Reen being present. Another issue I had with the character writing is that a lot of characters were just underutilized or underwritten. The biggest example of this that I hated was, but where Class 7's writing kind of fell flat for me, made up for it more than enough with the NPC writing. Because these NPCs in this game, compared to the rest of the series, I think these NPCs are the best that they've ever had in the series. So usually with Trail/Kiseki games, I typically talk to every single NPC at least 3 times so I can see all the dialogue in the games. But I really enjoyed reading all the NPC dialogue in this game. Like, all these NPCs were very interesting. I think that the school setting being a centralized location that you return to at the start and the end of the chapter most of the time was beneficial for them for these NPC storylines. Some of my personal favorites, number 1, that girl Mint. I love Mint so much. I would die for her. Bridget and Alan's storyline was cute. I like following that one. And then Vivi and Lind, their antics, or I guess Vivi's antics, were fun to watch too. Fun fact, you can tell the difference between Vivi and Lind by looking at their eyes. I think Vivi has lighter eyes than Lind does. That NPC, the Yaoi girl that was writing Yaoi in the literature club, was funny. Like, I'm fine with tropes being reserved to characters like that, NPCs, because it was funny. So on the topic of anime tropes, I do kind of want to segue into something I've been thinking about when I started this game, and something that a lot of people might misinterpret about this series, I guess. So with Cold Steel 1, Falcom decided that they wanted to target younger audiences, which meant that they started throwing in anime tropes into this game. And it's not to say that the older games don't have that kind of stuff, but they really bumped it up with this game in the early parts. And a lot of people who start with this game not knowing that there's 6 other games in the series think that this is all this series is about, is just anime. Because for example, there's a tsundere trope, there's the schoolgirl trope, there's the, you know, accidentally bumped into you and now we're like laying on top of each other kind of trope. And I think that people see that for the first few hours and see how slow the game is and then don't want to play it. But after that, I'm surprised at how fast they tone that down and knock all those tropes down, but it was kind of hard for me to get through, and I'm pretty used to that kind of stuff. Like, I'm used to seeing that kind of stuff, as cliche and tropey as it is. But this is not what this game is really about, nor this, especially not the series. And it does get better as you progress through the series, but don't be deterred by seeing that, because I almost was, to be honest, and I knew what I was going into. Alright, so now let's talk about the story. If you have not played this game, spoiler warning. Timestamp on the screen, timestamp in the chapters, go to the end of the video, get out of here. But how I'm going to organize this section is I'm going to go chapter by chapter and just talk about what I liked, what I didn't like, what I was thinking at the time, my reactions, you know, all that good stuff. So personally, I really like the predictable gameplay loop of Cold Steel 1, where you had social time, you go to the old schoolhouse, then you get the practical exam, then you get assigned your field mission, then you go to the field mission, and on the field mission there's a character revelation or character development, and then you have a plot revelation, and then you go back to social time or the end of the chapter. It was predictable, but it was a good kind of predictable, because it just made it more interesting when they threw loops at you like Crow and Millum joining the class. But I do think that it had a negative effect on me in chapter 6 whenever you go to Roar, because by that point in the game, the old schoolhouse had already been explored and every character had more or less already had their development, besides Elisa. So I already had about 3 points of that gameplay loop that I was talking about already resolved. Chapter 1 eases the player into Erebonia and its politics, and I guess how the students go to the school and everything too, and the concept of field missions and what they're going to be doing as students of this military academy. And it also serves as an introduction to the characters you're going to be interacting with for the rest of the game. So, you know, nothing too special with chapter 1, it's just kind of an introduction. It does what it's supposed to do. Not going to spend too much time on that one. But then we get to chapter 2, and they introduce Crow here, and you know, if you played the game, spoilers here, Crow is pretty important. I thought he was just a cool dude. I was wrong. I really like chapter 2 as a whole and how it explores the theme of nobility, because we really get to see how people in Erebonia who live around nobility react to and navigate around the nobles. So we get to really see how they feel behind closed doors when the nobles aren't around, and we get to see how they act when they're right in front of them too, because Eustace is a noble, and we also get to see Machias's perspective as a non-noble reacting to nobles too. I really like the theme of that in at least the early parts of this game. Well, really throughout this game, since we also get Reen's backstory actually here too, now that I mention it. We get his background in nobility and how he's technically, he doesn't treat himself as a noble, even though technically he could if he wanted to. And we also get his training background, and Eustace is able to relate to him on that level because he also feels like he's in the same position as well. So that was a nice character moment I really enjoyed. And then we also get Eustace and Machias and their conflicting ideals together, and we see them overcome that throughout this chapter. So it was a really nice chapter. It felt really complete, like a whole storyline was started and finished and was still able to develop after the fact. So it was a really nice chapter. I enjoyed it. So chapter 3 is where you go to the Nord Highlands, which is Gaius's hometown? Area? Homeland? Yeah, homeland. It was by far the slowest chapter, and I didn't dislike it, but I did feel like it was slow at times. And if this game didn't have a turbo feature, this would be by far the worst segment I've ever seen in a JRPG, not gonna lie. But I will say that I can defend this chapter because I think it makes sense from a thematic standpoint. This chapter was meant to explore Gaius's background, and his background is that he comes from a very easygoing and slow lifestyle. So they come outside and they wake up early, they go tend to the sheep and all that, and that's what you do when you go over there. And it's very peaceful and slow, and it could seem tedious to someone who's used to something more fast-paced, I guess. So it makes sense for it to be kind of slow and boring and tedious like this. I will say that the open world segment was cool at first. I was like, oh, look how far they've come. This is very cool technically, I guess, coming from Azure. But then I was like, oh wait, this game came out in 2013, 2 years after Skyrim. So it got hit with the open world syndrome, where they're like, let's make everything super huge and then put nothing in it. just so we can say, look how big this world is. And I definitely felt it within the first 2 minutes of just walking around, even with turbo. I turned the turbo off at a certain point just to see. Dude, I almost fell asleep right then and there. It was awful. I don't think I could play this game on base Vita or base PS3. I feel like that would be painful. But like I said earlier, I don't want to be reviewing this game. I kind of want to stick to story analysis. I think it is important for this section to be kind of slow and to understand just how much is at stake and what kind of lifestyle would be taken over if the Empire were to just, you know, turn on the Nord Highlands. Because the nomadic people that live in the Nord Highlands aren't really affiliated or allied with the Empire. They're just kind of on a mutual agreement to stay out of each other's way and kind of help each other when they need it, but they're not obligated or, you know, sworn to do that. So there's a possibility that the Empire could turn the the Nord Highlands, I mean, into a battleground, or just turn on the people themselves. So it's kind of a mutual agreement that either one of them could break at any given moment. I feel like I'm kind of repeating myself, but I just want to emphasize how important it is to understand the lifestyle that you're living through in Chapter 3, just to understand the stakes, should that ever happen, which I think that might in the future. I'm not really sure. So basically, after you help out all the people, there's an explosion, I guess, that happens. Oh, wait, never mind. You meet Gwen. I hated Gwen as a character because he was just way too tropey, way too creepy. Yeah, I don't even have anything to say about that. But anyways, after that, there's an explosion at the watchtower, and then there's an explosion at the other base that the watchtower is watching, I guess. And you investigate that, and then you go to the military base where Vander is at, and you talk to him, and then some stuff happens between that, I don't really remember. And then you go and talk to Milim at the Stonehenge, or the Stone Circle. And that was cool because I was like, oh, Milim's cool. I'm interested to see that. We only seen a little bit about her. And you fight her. She's like, if you're not strong enough to beat me, you can't go kill the terrorist or whatever, whoever you tried to find. And they're like, okay. And so you beat her, and she's like, wow, y'all are pretty strong. And then y'all go find the cannon, right? I think that's what happens. And then after that, you go to the ruins, I guess, where they're staying at, where G and them are at. And you go through that dungeon, and then you eventually get to G. Now let me pause here. I had a theory on G. I didn't know who he was initially, and once I read his title description, which was Bespectacled Man, I was like, wait, they use Bespectacled Man for Elisa's father, like as his title. And I was like, hold on, is G Elisa's father? And I was very confused. Now, don't say anything in the comments because this hasn't been cleared up at all. I know who G is in relation to a different Trails game, but I still don't know if this is true or not, so don't say anything. But I came up with that theory in my head, and then I realized they use Bespectacled Man or Bespectacled Woman as a common term for people with glasses in this game. So then I was like, maybe this theory isn't even true, because after I saw that, I was looking for it again, and I noticed they called 3 different people bespectacled blank underscore whatever, because there were about 4 bespectacled people. So I don't know if that holds merit anymore, but I felt kind of big brain when I saw that, because I was like, I remembered. But I don't think that's true anymore. So then after that, we go back to Vander and we report what we saw there, and we take Milim with us, and somebody comes in. There's a dude named Lecter. No spoilers. He is important. He is important. I was freaking out when I saw him. I will get to that later. But we see him, and he leaves, and then we see a cutscene later. I might be skipping something in between here, but we see something later where C is outside of Gwen's house at the lake. And right here I was thinking, hold on, why is he in front of Gwen's house? That's weird. I don't trust Gwen, because Gwen is the former president of, you know, Elisa's mom's company. I forgot the last name. And then, you know, I thought that was weird, but that didn't lead to anything. But we see Sharon there, and she's watching the plane. I'm like, what is up with Sharon? Like, I know she has a background in something, but I didn't know what it was. And I was like, okay, well, maybe she's like a Jaeger. I thought she was a Jaeger, and I completely forgot about Ouroboros. So I didn't even think about that at the time. I didn't forget about it as a whole. I forgot that that was even an affiliation she could have, I should say. So I was like, okay, maybe she's like a Jaeger, or she's a military spy or something like that. And then Sarah comes out, And I was like, what? Sarah knows Sharon. And I thought that initially too, now we're getting into it, because I thought that Sarah was a Jaeger and that's why she found Fee initially, but it turns out she was a Bracer, which makes sense as well. But I thought that Sarah, Sharon, and Fee all came from the same Jaeger Corp or whatever. So that's what I was thinking there at that time. It ended up kind of being close. I just got all 3 affiliations wrong, but you know, I thought I was onto something there, but I ended up not being. So chapter 4 starts and we see Osborne talking to Claire. I can't really talk about Osborne or my thoughts on Osborne without spoiling the rest of the series, but just know that I've always felt like Osborne was kind of like he was planning something, and that obviously doesn't pan out later as far as I know. I don't know, he could come back to life as far as I know, but that doesn't pan out because he dies. But I always thought that he was gonna do something evil and like make some huge move here in this Erebonia arc. After this, we see Prince Oliver talk about the political situation going on in Zemuria as a whole, like the whole country. And I will get back to this scene because I can't really talk about this without talking about the rest of the games. Fast forward to when Fee and Laura have the swimming competition, and Laura's basically like, I need you to use 100% of your power. I know you're holding back. And then Fee does it and she's like, why are you holding back? And Fee said, I don't know. And so Laura's frustrated about that. I never really understood why she was so frustrated about that, even after her explanation, but I'll get to that whenever this next scene, not the next scene, but you know, the scene I'm talking about comes up. Around this time, we see Elliot also outside in the hallway talking to Nathart, and it's foreshadowing to later in this chapter when they reveal Elliot's affiliation with the military, which is his dad. And it really made me, it hurt me inside, to be honest, because that's my favorite character right there, and he can't tell me anything. My boy, I was genuinely concerned for my friend when I saw that. And then Reen's sister Elise comes to the military academy, and at this part I was kind of conflicted because the whole reason Elise came over there was to show him the letter, or to address him on the letter I should say, about him basically wanting to cut ties with the family since he doesn't consider himself a noble, which I kind of agreed with. I was like, you know, you do what you want to do, bro, it's your life. But Elise was making a big problem out of it because she was like, no, you're family, like you can't just do that. So I was kind of in the middle. I don't really have an opinion either way. I'm kind of on Reen's side where he can just, you know, do whatever he wants to, but I don't know. We'll see as the series progresses and what he decides to do. And then Elise gets all upset and then she runs off and we have to find her. Basically, after all of that, we end up at the old schoolhouse and she's there. And that door that was out there, they go down there and Elise is there. And Monster shows up, or the statue, right? And then Reen goes berserk basically and turns white hair and he's like, don't touch my sister. He's like, oh snap, he's going Super Saiyan. I knew about that because I saw something later in the series, but I was just expecting that to happen, so it didn't really surprise me. But it is kind of tropey. I do like that as a theme in a lot of games, but it depends entirely on how it's written. So far I think it's been written pretty decently, and I do like the mystique behind it. I'm still invested in knowing how this happened because they didn't explain it in CS1 more or less, like they just hinted at it. So I am excited to see it. It depends entirely on how they write it though, like I said. So let's fast forward to arriving in Heimdallr then. I was very excited to see Elliot's backstory because I love that character so much. I know he's not very popular, but I love Elliot. But we get to meet Fiona and that was cool. I like all of Elliot's family. Dude, I love Elliot so much. I'm gonna get into that in the character video. So then after that, we go to the guild branch, and I don't know how to approach this without spoilers, but basically, bracer guilds in every other region besides Erebonia are important. I won't talk any more about that, but it was surprising to me to see that there wasn't a bracer guild here, and that they don't exist in Erebonia. Fast forward to meeting Vita. So when we initially saw Vita, I did not suspect a thing because I was like, wow, pretty girl singer. That's great. I love that. And that was it. Like, that was the whole thing. I didn't think anything of her outside of that. I was shocked later when the reveals started happening. multiple reveals started happening around her, to say the least. And then we go into that underground passage under the hotel, and we come out and we see Elliot's friends. Not to make this into an Elliot video, but I love that moment a lot. It hit close to home. I'm gonna get into that in the character video. So after that night falls, they go back to the Bracer Guild to turn in for the night, and then Laura's like, you know what? I want violence. And she goes and she's like, Fee, we gotta fight. And then Fee's just like, okay. And I was confused, because I was very confused as to why she decided to do that, because she said, knowing what Elliot told me today, I know what I must do now. And I said, what do you have to do now? And she said, I need to fight Fee. And there was a disconnect there, because I did not understand what she was talking about. So they go to the park and fight, which is honestly probably the worst place to try to fight. I don't know why they were so insistent on that. And they both fight, and it turns into a draw. But then Fee's like, yo, actually I lost, because if it was daytime it wouldn't have worked. The flash bomb wouldn't have worked. Let me tell you my backstory. And then everybody's like, okay. And she tells her backstory, and I will get to the series connection on that later, because that is important. But then all of a sudden they're like, oh, that's cool. And Laura doesn't share her side of the story because she won. And I was like, okay, well, next chapter. And so then they're like, okay, well, Reen and Machias, you guys aren't exempt from this either. I'm gonna whoop your ass too. And then they're like, why? It's like, because we need to show you that we can link. Okay. And so we do that, and we beat up Machias and Reen, and then the night's over, and Elliot's confused the next day. That whole sequence felt very forced as like a character development moment for the two of them, like a bonding thing, because they become not best friends, but they get over their differences after the fact, when nothing really happened. Like, Laura just understands Fee, and Fee knows next to nothing about Laura after the fact. So I don't know why Fee was okay with that. I don't know. It felt very... It wasn't rushed. It was just... I felt like they could have wrote it differently or done it a different way. It felt kind of shoehorned into here. Like, they needed to make that development happen right now, because they couldn't do it later. After that, we do more field assignments, and then one comes up, and it's Phantom Thief B, or LeBlanc again. And I'm like, oh Lord, here we go. Because, you know, other series, he's there. I'm not gonna say anything, but he was a pain in the ass. Luckily this time, it wasn't as bad, but it was cool. It was cool to see his character and actually see him being a person and not just Phantom Thief B, I guess. I really liked how he was hiding in plain sight in this game. So then after that, we go to a dinner with Oliver, his sister Alphen, and then Reen's sister Elise. I almost forgot her name. And we talk with all of them, and Oliver reveals that he is the one that founded Class 7, which was very surprising to me. I was like, yo, that is so cool. And then after that, he also reveals that, I was about to say Shara, but Sarah was a bracer in the past, and that she's probably one of the strongest people in Erebonia, is what I think he said. And I was like, yo, that's cool too, but I kind of expected that one. So after that, Sarah actually shows up as always, perfect timing, and she abducts them, and then she takes them to talk with Claire, and they're basically like, hey, we need you to defend the city tomorrow. And they're like, okay, that's our job. And so they do that. So after that, fast forward, we go next day, protect the festival, everything's cool. And then we see my baby girl, Toa. We see her, and Angelica's there too, I guess. But we see my girl, Toa. And she talks to them. And while we're talking to Toa, the water system, I guess, the fountain just explodes. And then Toa goes in and she's like, yo, evacuate, this is the plan now, I need you to go here, here, here. And I'm like, yes ma'am, let's go, that's my girl. And she was being adaptable. I'm like, on the fly, bro. But this is not a Toa video, so let me chill out real quick. But basically we see all that, and then G comes up and he abducts Alphen and Elise. I always forget her name. He abducts both of them and then goes underground with them, and we follow them. And when we finally catch up with them, G more or less is cornered, and he's like, actually, I don't even need these hostages because my work here is already done, and I wouldn't dare lay a finger on Prince Alphen or Princess Alphen. And so I was like, okay, well, what's his edge here? Like, what's his goal here then? Because if he could have killed her and then had, you know, whatever. But it's obvious that he's only doing something to make a point. He's one of those kind of villains. And I was like, okay, all right, I like that. Gives you a little bit more depth. And then he summons a dragon and I'm like, yo, where'd this even come from? And he runs away and I'm like, what? And so I was like, okay, well, we're fighting a dragon now. But then I was confused because immediately after he said that, like he wasn't gonna lay a finger on Princess Alpha, and he pulls out a knife and then threatens to stab her, and then he's like, I'm not scared of death. And I was like, but you just said, I don't know. And then after that, who we know as SV and I guess now C at the time shows up. And then I'm like, yo, S. Yo. And I was like, oh wait, the story. And so I pay attention and I'm like, okay, well, who are you guys? And then C shows up and I'm like, yo, I know you. Who are you? And then let me back up real quick. It makes sense because Crow was there when the water thing blew up talking to Toa, and he was like, yo, I gotta get out of here. And so he does that, but then he's like, let me change into my costume real quick on some Scooby-Doo shit. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense now. I'm seeing the pieces, because when I replayed this, I was looking out for it more or less, and I was like, all right, that makes sense now. He did this at that time. Okay, yeah, I should have seen that coming, but I completely trusted that boy. I forgot to mention just now, this is actually the first time that C calls himself C. So I guess I wouldn't have been able to find out before this, but this is the first time he says, call me C, to Reen in the party. So that's a detail I forgot about. This is also the first time that they addressed themselves as the Imperial Liberation Front as well. So after that, we talked to Oliver, Governor Regnitz, and we talked to Osborne himself as Class 7. And I was surprised, like I said earlier, at how Osborne carried himself and how he talks. Because he was praising Class 7, and I always saw him as this, you know, high and mighty, evil, stern dude, but he was praising them and talking to them, and also Sarah as well. He addressed Sarah as, how are you doing, Bracer? Like, are you doing well or whatever, checking up on her, which was cool. And then he talked about how Principal Van Dyke was his superior when he was in the army, and I didn't know that, and I was like, yo, see, look how interconnected this is. Like, I didn't know that. So Principal Van Dyke was a G. He was moving, making moves, and we barely know anything about him. So now we're at chapter 5. So the chapter opens up with Class 7 in the classroom talking about their thoughts on Osborne, and I thought that was a really good world building moment, and it gives a lot of insight on the Erebonia point of view on their own chancellor, which was very good. So after that, Crow and Milim joined the class, and I was like, yo, I was actually surprised when that happened, because I knew that Crow would eventually join the class, or at least the party. I didn't think he'd join the whole class. I thought he was just going to join the party, but to see Milim as well, I didn't know about that, so I was surprised. But we get a scene after that where Instructor Thomas talks about the Lance Maiden and the Knights, and Milim knows about this, and she actually answers the question. And so the Lance Maiden, I will get into later, because she's pretty important, but I thought that was cool. So we go through our normal day with Crow and Milim in the mix, and then night falls, and Reen is outside, and he runs into Misty, and it's revealed that Misty is actually Vita, and I was like, huh, that makes sense, that's cool. And suspected nothing of it yet again. I was like, okay, well, what does that have to do with anything? Like, that's just a cool detail. Clueless. So at this point, this is important because Emma actually gets development. I know, shocker, right? So when Reen comes back from meeting Vita/Misty, she smells lavender on him. And Reen's like, no, it's not what you're thinking or anything like that. And then he leaves, and then Emma thinks to herself, lavender, it can't be. And I said, if they give Emma development and it's related to her, it has to be something important. And I didn't think about it again at all until she actually revealed what she was talking about at the very end of the game. Fast forward to when we're preparing to board the train again, and we see Lecter again. And they talk and everything. He talks to Milim, he talks to Class 7, he talks to everybody. And then Sarah comes up behind and says, hey, you have something for me. And then Lecter hands her a list of every single known member of the Imperial Liberation Front. So I'm not sure how Sarah reacted to that or what she did after the fact. I could probably come to a conclusion now that's might be apparently obvious, but I was like, hey, that's interesting. So after that, we go to Legram, and so they get settled in and they go to the Bracer Guild, and we see a character that we saw in an earlier chapter, and that's Toval. More on him later. So after that, we go and have dinner with Arsed, the Radiant Blade Master. And he reveals that he actually knows Reen's master, who is Yun Cafe, and that he's dueled him multiple times, and that they haven't had a true winner. And so Reen's like, yo, I gotta fight you now. So they have a duel, and Reen goes sicko mode, and he turns into the white hair Super Saiyan dude. And Arsed's like, yo, we don't do that here. You have plot armor, but not against me. And he beats him up, and then Reen's like, I need to get stronger. I need to conquer this. And then Arsed says, the power within. The power within. And then Reen's like, alright, I learned something here. And he talks to Class 7 about that after the fact, and he says, I'll try to be more open about this in the future, which is kind of cool. After this, not much really happens. Arsed leaves with Toval, and basically night comes, and they're like, hey, you don't have to do any of these things. You're in charge of the Bracer Guild. You don't do whatever you want. You don't have to help these people if you don't want to. And then these kids go and run off to the castle, and we're like, yo, we gotta go help them to advance the plot. And so we do that, and we come back. Actually, we don't come back. There's a few points I want to talk about in here. So there was a door at the bottom of the castle that was the same as the door at the bottom of the schoolhouse. It was the exact same door. And I don't remember if they followed up on that. So my thoughts on that now that I'm thinking about it is that's where another mech is stored. Maybe it was where Crow's mech was stored. Maybe it was someone else's mech, one of the other people's mechs. I think there's a mech behind there. If it's anything, like if I'm guessing. Yeah, that pretty much happens. We see the Lance Maiden. Yeah, I can say that. We see the Lance Maiden show up at the end to save them at the top floor. Whatever that means. I don't know what that means. And then we see Emma talking to the cat again, being suspicious. And Emma really showed what she knows here, I guess. At least a little bit more to Class 7 themselves, because we obviously know she's up to something. Like she can't hide it from the player, but she starts showing a little bit more of her hand to everybody else, and I don't think they suspected it. I know Reen did a little bit, but I was like, maybe we'll start getting a little bit more from her at this point. Spoiler alert, we don't really until the very end. Fast forward, we go to Guerrilla Fortress after the fact, and I'm like, hey, this place is important because this is where the game began, and this is where those cannons are about to go off in the prologue. And so I'm like, okay, so now we're getting into it, but we're getting into it pretty soon because this is the hook of the game. So like, why are we getting into it right now? How long is the final chapter? But let me back up real quick because I forgot about this. So Reen is on the train platform to go to Guerrilla Fortress, right? And he sees the bullet train with Toa, Oliver, and Osborne, and his mind slows down, and I was like, okay, this is a cinematic effect. But then Reen's like, what was that? And I'm like, oh, that's an actual thing, like he saw that. And so I said, well, what are we gonna call this? Because he saw Toa first, right? So I'm gonna call it Toa Vision. The power of Toa was so strong, he literally slowed down his vision. That's canon right there. Alright, but back to Guerrilla Fortress. So I thought this was an interesting part of the game because this is where most of them are most likely going to, well, not here because of what happens later, but this is the setting that they're going to be working in most likely as military school students. So it was interesting seeing a lot of their reactions, specifically, again, not a character video, but Elliot's reaction. We'll get to him later too. But, you know, just all of them, the whole students, and seeing how they react to certain aspects of the military was interesting. And, you know, some of them had second thoughts. Some of them were like, yeah, I'm built for this. And some of them were just indifferent. But back to Elliot. So it was interesting seeing Olaf Craig because Elliot, in my mind, or at least in his mind, he's like, yeah, my dad made me choose between my dream of music and my mom, and ever since my mom died, you know, I was like, oh, his dad's scary. Like, his dad made him choose between the military and music. That's evil. And we see him, he's all stern, and then he's like, Elliot, my boy, and he comes through, and I'm like, yo, his dad's just like, he's all happy and everything. I love the dynamic of their family, but again, not a character video. We're not doing that. Yeah, fast forward, the tanks go off, the automatic tanks go off after that demonstration, and they're like, yo, they're not supposed to do that. And we basically loop back to the beginning of the game, the intro of the game, and we go through that dungeon. And long story short, we get to the end of the dungeon, and the cannon doesn't go off, it shoots a blank, and I'm like, okay, sure, it shot a blank. And I was like, okay, well, that's a throw. Like, that threw me off from the beginning. I was kind of confused. Well, not confused, it was a good subversion of expectations as to what was going to happen, especially as someone who played the other games, knowing what happens. So I was like, okay, cool. And then they go and fight S. So they stop the cannons. It was never made public, and the chapter ends, and they basically just say, hey, something's going on in Crossbow. So half a month after chapter 5 ends, chapter 6 begins, and the school board of directors come and meet up for the first time all year to have the first meeting in autumn. And I was like, why are y'all having the first meeting in autumn? But that's beside the point, because they go and they talk about the fate of class 7 and whether or not they'll have a field assignment that month because of what happened in Garrelia Fortress. Once again, I'll get into it later, but Oliver handled this situation perfectly. I will talk about him later. And so after that, they leave the classroom, evening hits, and once again, not a Toa video, but I have to fangirl, okay? So what happens? Toa was at the conference that they stopped from, you know, being destroyed. So she comes and she personally thanks Reen. She's like, thank you. And Reen's like, nah, it's no big deal, baby. You already know how I roll. I was like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And then Toa, basically, you end up going shopping with Toa. And she's like, okay, well, what are you guys going to do for next month for the festival? And they're like, what? There's a festival? And she's like, yeah. So she's like, let me help you guys with that. Meet me tomorrow evening, and I'll help you with the festival. And I was like, yes. Let's go. And that was my motivation for the entire chapter, not gonna lie. So after that, we go to the next day and we do the normal, you know, S-Link bonding event, persona stuff. And Angelica puts in a request to help. You have to fight her, basically. And I was like, okay, cool. I ain't never seen her fight. And she starts doing martial arts. And I was like, wait, someone else does martial arts that I know. And then she's like, yeah, that's because somebody taught me. I will get to that later, who that person is and why I was like, yo. But that's another thing to go back to it. Angelica is a cool character when they let her be a cool character. But they just never let her be a cool character, and I'm still kind of disappointed in that. I hope that, you know, I know the perception of CS2, but I hope that eventually she becomes a better character. So after that, we go to the schoolhouse and we go to the final floor, and they're like, wow, that was anticlimactic, nothing happened. And then Reen's like, alright, well, I got a date with Toa, so it doesn't matter. And we go and talk to Toa, and they have a cute scene there. I'm not going to get into it because I will be here all day, so I'm just gonna skip that. So fast forward again, next day comes around and I'm like, alright, well, next field assignment, let's get on the train, let's go ahead and go where we're gonna go. But then Sarah's like, yo, we're not doing that today. I need you to go out to the field. And they're like, oh my, please let this be a normal field trip with Sarah? No way. You know, Magic School Bus, and an airship comes out, and I'm like, yo, well, let me not say that. This is the Courageous. And Oliver comes out and says that, and Arced is the one that's, you know, the captain. I was like, I would have not have guessed that this was gonna happen. So that was another twist that I was talking about earlier, where the formula is very predictable, but they throw a loop at you. That happens a few times, and I really enjoyed that. But then we go flying around with Oliver, Arced, and all of them around Erebonia to go to the next field assignment place. So that was cool. So during this flight around Erebonia, we see multiple people, but two prominent things that we do see is one, we see Oliver's family for the first time, like his mother and father for the first time in the series actually. So that was cool. More on that later. And then we also see Lecter and Osborn together. More on that scene later because he says something there. And then we arrive in Roar. So we get to Roar and then Sharon's like, yo, let's go. And my friend pointed out something funny. So she was like, go down the escalator. And I was like, why? And I was going to do it anyway. I was like, I was thinking about that as soon as I saw the escalator. I was like, I'm going to go down the wrong side on purpose because they're probably going to say something. But if you do that, Sharon will call Reen out specifically. And that little piece of dialogue, again, not a character video. I love the character. I could talk about that character for a long time. But anyway, to progress, so to get out of synopsis mode, I'm going to talk about myself. So at this point in the story, I didn't know what to expect because the initial hook of the game had already been resolved. So I'm like, what are we even doing in Roar right now? Like, what's going to happen? What's supposed to happen? So I wouldn't say I got burnt out on this part, but I definitely didn't really have motivation to just keep grinding the game out at the pace I was. Because I was pulling like 6-7 hour streams with this game, but this time I just ran it up for like, I think like 3. But I guess right now we could just fast forward to when Elisa and Reen have that moment together. So they talk about their past. And here, I saw the picture of Reen's dad again, and it looked a lot like G or Gideon. So, you know, maybe my theory still checks out, maybe. After that, Reen sneaks out and goes and talks to Claire. And I thought that this moment was funny. And I was also like, yo, Claire is looking good. But then Fee was there and I was like, oh, okay. But then another good character moment, Fee was like, hey, I could leave, bro. Like, I don't need to be here right now. And then Rhea was like, nah, it's strictly business. Like, we're not playing around right now. I don't have time for this kind of stuff. I'm a military man. And then Fee was like, I could still leave. But basically after that, I'm gonna do a super jump. So the factory explodes after the field missions and you go through the tunnel. And Crow, right here, this is important. Crow is like, yo, these miners need help. I'm a dip. And everybody's like, all right, cool, Crow, you're cool. And I didn't have him in my party, so I didn't feel that loss. If I felt that loss a little more, I would have thought about it, but I never really used Crow as much as I liked him. So after that, we go and we fight Vulcan. I think the most important part of that was Fee's connection to that, because Fee had a background in being a Jaeger, and he was also a Jaeger in an opposing group. And he's like, oh yeah, your boss died, and I felt that. So after we fight Vulcan, we fight C, we win, and he quote-unquote escapes out of a helicopter, and Claire and the other group that I'm forgetting right now comes back through, and Claire starts shooting immediately, and the other group is like, yo, don't do that. You didn't get permission to do that. And then Claire's like, yo, but I got a warrant. And then they shoot down the helicopter, and Crow, or C, I guess it doesn't matter, quote unquote dies. I didn't believe that for a second. I knew that he escaped because C wouldn't let something like that just kill him. And we see above that a sniper rifle is what shot him down. More on that later, like literally in like 2 minutes. But eventually after that, Oliver comes up and Crow's behind him. And I was like, I had no reason to suspect anything because Crow was literally right there. Even looking back, I don't know how he did that. It's actually like very impressive. I don't know how the logistics behind that or how it worked, but it's very impressive. Like they made it believable. But after that, there's a scene where Claire and Sharon are together, and then Claire's like, how much does your employer know about this? And I'm like, I made a joke. I was like, Sharon has 2 jobs. And she literally says that. She's like, which one? I got 2 jobs. But later we learn that she's an Ouroboros member. I initially, like I said, thought she was a Jaeger and that's what she was talking about. But it's cool looking back and seeing that. That's more or less the chapter. So after that, there is a pretty big jump. It's like weeks, if not like a month after chapter 6 that goes into the final chapter. So that final chapter comes through and I spent about 9 hours streaming this final chapter because I kind of got led on as to the pacing. The pacing was off on this chapter, in my opinion. I'm used to these chapters being long at the end, but what I thought was the final dungeon had 2 more hours of stuff after the fact, and I skipped a lot of what I typically do. So It was a lot. So the chapter starts, the festival begins, and you know, the social aspect is cool. I love talking to the NPCs. I was genuinely looking forward to the concert that they had planned, and I actually felt a lot of urgency when they said they were going to cancel at the final dungeon, not gonna lie. But then the actual final dungeon shows up, and I'm like, alright, well, I'm ready now. So the day ends on the festival day, and a barrier forms around the old schoolhouse. And Class 7 pulls out their Arcus units and they start glowing just like in the prologue, which I didn't put together until my friend told me about that. So I was like, yo. But after that, they pretty much just say, hey, go in there, get back so we can do the concert. And they're like, okay, I'll do whatever it takes to finish the concert. And they get warped into the final dungeon. And the final dungeon, from a visual standpoint, at first I was like, yo, this is just Alexander's Arena from FF14. But then I remember this game came out in 2013, so I was like, this game did this first, so the Alexander Arena copied this game, because like it's literally the same thing. But I was like, okay, that's cool. The final dungeon itself, layout wise, was not as annoying as some of the other games. Or not annoying. Annoying is not the word, let me stress that, it's not the word. Just long, I should say. The switch and the puzzle aspect of it, using all the characters, was, I guess, interesting. And I liked how linear it was, to be honest. I actually like how linear Falcom dungeons are, because I don't like when I have to do switches and puzzles and stuff like that in jrpg. But we go through all that, and then we get to the final boss arena. And when I got in here, I said, okay, they're pulling out all this tropes, because this is literally just unlimited blade works from Fate. Like, it's the same area. I'm like, you guys are just pulling out all the tropes, all the cliches, and just throwing them at me. And I like it, it's cool, but I'm just like, yo, that's happened before. And so then the final boss is essentially just like a giant shadow. And I was like, okay, cool. So then we fight the final boss. So Reen, basically, they're kneeling in front of the boss, and a voice inside of his head's like, yo, Awakener, we've chosen you. You need to wake up. And then there's words in front of him, and it spells out Valamir, I think is what it was, how you pronounce it. And I was like, dude, this is just Persona. And so he basically picks up the word, and then they teleport back to the old schoolhouse, and everybody's there, and they're like, it was all a dream. You guys were standing there for a while. And I said, alright, that was kind of cliche. Like, I feel like doing all that and then just saying it was a dream is kind of a cop-out. At that point, I was just kind of like, okay, well, it's too many cliches right now for me. So let me back up again, because I forgot something. So Emma started revealing at the very end that she knew something, or that she was more than what, you know, they wrote her to be. She was a magical girl, essentially, that's watching over Reen. And she tries to explain herself, but Reen basically just says, yo, we're not doing that right now. You had plenty of chances to explain yourself. You're not doing that in the final dungeon. Then she's like, oh, okay. So I actually did her final bonding event, and she still says nothing. She's like, I want to explain myself, and Reen's like, yo, nah, I'm cool. You got secrets. I don't care. And I kind of respect that, to be honest, but I hate how there's no progression in Emma's story whatsoever. So after the final dungeon, the party wakes up, and they're in the basement of the old schoolhouse, like I said. And the door opens, and there's a robot there, like a giant mech. So I actually got spoiled on this because I own an art book for CS1, and I looked on the back cover and the robot was there. So I knew that there were going to be robots involved in the series. And I wish that I didn't see that, because this might have had a bigger impact on me or shocked me more, but I was like, oh, there it is. Like, that's what we've been looking for the whole time. So that's kind of on me for getting spoiled, but that reveal didn't really hit me as hard as it might have hit other people. So fast forward again to the next day, Osborne's national address happens, and Crow is missing, and also Millam's missing too. But I was like, yo, Crow's just slacking off. You know, he doesn't want to hear this. He doesn't care about politics or anything like that. It doesn't matter. Great writing. I had no reason to suspect him up until the very end. The reveal of him being C actually caught me off guard. I did not expect that at all. But yeah, so we go and find Millam first, and Millam's just looking at the robot, and she's like, yo, yeah, let's go listen to Gramps. And she goes back, and they listen to the address, and as the address is going on, Milim is piecing stuff together in her head. She actually knows before she even speaks it. But Milim is like, actually, you know your friend Crow, right? And they're like, yeah. Well, he's missing today. That's weird, right? And they're like, yeah. You guys don't think that's weird? Why would that be weird? Let me go back to chapter 3 real quick. Y'all don't remember when he was doing this, this, and this? And they're like, yeah, that is weird, but he had an alibi. Did he really? You remember in chapter 5 when he did this? You remember in the mines when he just dipped? And it was like, well, he had an alibi. And she's like, nah, y'all aren't listening. And the speech is going on at the same time while she's piecing this together for the party. And it was very cunning of Milim, but she just delivered it so nonchalant. Like, she's like, they'll get it eventually. I don't even know how to describe it. Like, the way her personality just meshes with her delivering that message to them, I was like, man, that was some good writing right there. But it slowly builds up, and when they realize that Crow is, you know, missing and that he was actually C and he pulls the trigger, I was like, yo, because that shocked me when I saw that. And then after that, actually, let me back up. Osborn dying as a whole just shocked me too, because I always thought that Osborn was gonna have a bigger role in the Erebonia arc, because he was built up so much. Just for him to die at the end of CS1, that actually shocked me like quite a bit. And I don't know if he's gonna come back or not, because I still think that he had a bigger role in the series. But like, the fact that that happened and that Crow was the one to kill him was very shocking to me. And so then Vita goes and she shows the you know, digital recording to everybody in the school, and she's like, this is what happened. And I was like, how did she do that? And then she reveals that she was a part of Ouroboros, and I'm like, whoa, I didn't expect you to do that either. I thought you're like, cute girl, bro. Like, for real. And so then I was like, okay. And so she shows them that, and everybody's like, yo, they're coming over here. It's somebody in this room. Wait, what? It's somebody in this room. And then they come and they pull up in the mechs to the school, and I was like, okay, this is cool. I'm like, I'm really enjoying this. Back up again, we see the two dudes who are with Duke Kane in chapter 5 in the mechs at the end too as well, which was, I don't know how to piece that together yet, but well, I do, but you know, I'm not trying to think about that now when I'm still recording. But basically, back up again, we see Vita talking to LeBlanc, and she reveals, that's when she reveals she was a part of Ouroboros with LeBlanc or Phantom Thief B. So then I was like, okay, cool. And then Emma's just like, oh yeah, I'm related to her too. And I was like, okay, well, that's cool. And she foreshadowed that too by saying the lavender thing in the previous chapter too. And I was like, okay, well, who cares, Emma? But that's cool. So by this point, it's like an hour and a half past the final dungeon. I'm kind of tired, to be honest, because like I said, 9-hour stream. But I was still kind of, I wasn't getting as hype as I'm making it out to be now in the moment, but I did think that a lot of this stuff was cool. So then they go to the gate, and we see the defense force, which is all the professors and all the teachers being the defense force for the mechs. And Crow and them come up behind the defense force, and Class 7 has to defend the school from Crow, S, Scarlet, and Vulcan. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. And so we beat through Vulcan and his mech, obviously. But then Sharon. But then what's her name? Scarlet comes through, and she's like, actually, I have plot armor, literally. And I was like, okay, well, I even just straight up went, you can't win this battle. I saw that immediately. I was like, you can't win. And then Reen, so I made fun of this part, I'm gonna be honest, like I've been making fun of it earlier. So Reen goes into Persona mode. He's like, hold on. And they literally have the shadows like in Persona 2. I hate to compare everything to Persona, bro. It was like on a JoJo standard Persona or whatever. But even the name, like, dude, the name tag comes up and he's like Valmir. I'm like, dude, this is literally just Persona. And I hate making that comparison. I hate that, dude. He even says the name Arsene. Like, we were making fun of it while we were playing. Dude, let me just stop. I'm gonna get upset. It was cool, but I was like, this has happened before. And then they have the Gundam / Eva / mech trope, where the mech will come to you when you call it, when you need it the most. When you're at your lowest, the mech is there for you. It was cool. I'm not gonna lie, you hear it in my voice. It was cool. but I couldn't stop comparing it to other stuff. You fight S, and you win, and then Crow comes through, and he's like, all right, now we do the real final battle, like men. And he throws the sword at him, and I even commented on it. I was like, yo, the throwing the sword trope, like when your rival throws your sword to you and you catch it, and he's like, now show me what you're made of. I'm like, yo, let's go. I was hype even though I was making fun of it. And then I actually had to fight Crow, and it took me 3 tries, and I was like, okay, I'm over it now. This is awful. Okay, I know I said no review mode, but we're going review mode right now. So I was cool with the whole mech thing, and Reen fighting like on some Xenogear shit with the martial arts inside of the mech, and then fighting with the sword. So he comes through with the mech, and the mech is basically just rock, paper, scissors, and luck. And I hated that. It was probably the worst final boss I've ever seen in a JRPG ever. It took me so many tries on normal, and then when I played on Nightmare, I literally had to leave the fight and grind to beat him. Then again, I changed my strategy the second time, so that might be it. But I still had to leave and come back to the fight because I actually couldn't beat it on Nightmare at the level I was at, as far as I knew. We're going to stop talking about gameplay now and go back to the story. So I forgot to mention this in my initial recording, but I kind of wanted to analyze something that I saw. So after you get beat up by Plot Armor Scarlet, Reen tries to go into his Berserk mode again. And he's like, I could die if I do this. But then it's stopped by that voice calling him again with the I am thou, thou art I, you know, persona stuff before the mech comes out. And it had me thinking, just now I thought about it, I was like, you know, maybe he's compensating for his internal struggle with an external power. Does that make sense? Like, he's compensating for not being able to use his internal power and get over that and overcome it himself by using this mech. So I hope that they kind of play into that into CS2. I think that would be an interesting theme to go for, is somebody who's not weak, but you know, I'm trying to say something, but I'm not sure, but somebody who is quote unquote weak trying to use another power instead of just looking inward and fixing themselves. So after that, Crow basically he kind of wins, but Reen gets ejected away from his party, and the rest of the party is still there with Crow. Like, they could still get beat up by Crow. I don't know what happens because this is the end of the game, and I like that as a plot twist and as the end of the game, because when protagonists get separated from their main character and they have alone time and they reunite with the other characters, that JRPG trope, I don't even know if it's a trope, a cliche, I don't even call it a cliche or a trope, it's something that JRPGs always do. When they do that, it always hits. FF6, bro. FF6, the whole second half of the game when you're reuniting with your friends, literally has a song called Searching for Friends in the OST. Banger. You know it's gonna hit. I hope it hits because I've heard about CS2, but... And you know what? Actually, now I'm saying this, I didn't really even feel like going straight into CS2, to be honest, as excited as I sound right now about it, because I don't know, I really don't know how I feel about the ending of the game. Compared to the rest of the games in this series, I immediately always just wanted to go next game, day one, like immediately after. But it's been about 3 or 4 days since I beat this. Actually, yeah, it's been a while. It's been like 3 or 4 days and I still haven't wanted to go back and play CS2 immediately after. I've kind of let this game sit more than anything else. So, I don't know, but we'll see. But that's pretty much my entire review of the whole thing. I think now I'm going to go into series spoilers because this video is going on pretty long. Alright, so to go back to the point in chapter 5 where they go back to Gorelia Fortress, like in the beginning of the game, and the game loops on itself, I didn't realize this until today. So it's been about 6 days since I beat this game, and I'm just now realizing what happened. So when the game loops back on itself in the beginning, I didn't think to link that to the game looping back on itself, just like in was it 0 or Azure? Basically when it was 0. So whenever Lloyd in them and the group, the CPD, they go to the final dungeon and Estelle and Joshua are also there. I forgot about that completely, and how that actually had story stuff, and it wasn't just, you know, them removing Estelle and Joshua for the sake of spoilers, because there's a reason why Estelle and Joshua are there. It's because Kia went and changed time, like she changed the timeline, and that also affected CS1, and I didn't even think about that until just now. So I'm like, wait a minute, that makes sense. So Guerrilla Fortress being wiped out didn't happen in the original timeline as well too, now that I think about it. So I'm just thinking about all these points now and how they link to the other game, and that I didn't think about initially, and that's why I was confused. I thought that they were just doing another you know, loop back to the beginning of the game, just because also Millum and Crow were there, but they weren't there initially, right? That makes sense now that I think about it. Wow, yeah, that does make sense. Then I started reading into it a little bit more, and I realized that the cannons actually did go off in Guerrilla Fortress in the original timeline, but it didn't this time because Kia changed the timeline and the Aeon destroyed Guerrilla Fortress in this timeline, so in CS1 and in Azure. So that was a cool detail that got me just thinking about the game again, because it's been a minute since I've played Azure, and I completely forgot about most of this stuff. So I thought I was going to have more to say in terms of series spoilers, but luckily it's not going to be that long, because I just realized I recorded almost a 50-minute video. I had a lot of fun trying to piece together the timeline in regards to what's going on in Azure or OW. It was a lot of fun, and I was lost a lot of the time too, because it's been a minute since I've played OW. Oliver as a character, seeing his entire family, by the way, Oliver's entire family was cool. I really like that, seeing them for the first time, specifically his parents and his little brother. Seeing Osborne have the flashback to Trails in the Sky the Third was cool. Gideon being the terrorist leader in Azure, my friend pointed that out to me, and I didn't realize that. I thought he was a completely different person. Like I said, I thought he was Elise's father. He might still be Elise's father, I don't know, don't comment that. And then Toval showing up in Legram was cool, because I read the manga for that like they told me to, and I was interested on that. But also, I didn't realize that Toval was the person in the book from the first game, FC, and that Mick was the author of the book. I didn't realize that it didn't process his name until the very end when they talked to each other in the final chapter. So I was like, yo, and he called him Toby. I was like, yo, that's actually pretty cool. And then seeing Toval, Sarah, and Mick talk about someone, they were like, him? And they were talking about Arios. I was like, wow. I'm assuming they're talking about Arios. I don't know who else they'd be talking about. Angelica being taught by Kilika was cool. I really like that. Seeing the Steel Maiden statue, and also Arianrod herself, knowing what's going on in Crossbell and Azure was cool too. I'm interested to see where that leads to, because I know that gets developed in CS2. Seeing the characters who work in Erebonia, like Mueller and Zex Vander, those two were cool too. Finding out the vice principal was a Risha fan was it was funny, but it's kind of weird. And then seeing a business-oriented, like more serious Lecter was cool as well too. And trying to piece together where he was in the timeline, like how he was jumping between Crossbell and Erebonia as a whole, was really cool too. And seeing his relation to Millum was funny too. I like that. That was cute. Anton was cool too. I feel like they could have wrote him a little bit more. It was just fun seeing him there. I always love seeing Anton. I look forward to seeing him in the further games. And then, not a lot to say on this dude, but LeBlanc was surprisingly not annoying in this game. He was pretty cool. Compared to the old games, I was able to get his mysteries down, or his little treasure hunt down, without the help of the map or any guides or anything like that. They were pretty simple this time and not completely annoying. I was kind of annoyed just because, like, the elitist in me was like, these kids today don't know how hard it was. Like, back in the day, you couldn't do these side quests or the main quest with LeBlanc without a walkthrough, because they were impossible. But this time it was pretty manageable, so I'm glad they did, because they would have scared off a lot of people if they just made them as hard as the old games. But in general, I think that's about it. Oh, one more thing. I liked how the people in Erebonia talked about Crossbell. Like, they were like, they can't be serious that Crossbell is asking for independence. That'll never happen. and they almost didn't even care what was going on in Crossbell even after the terrorist attacks. They were just like, oh, that doesn't have anything to do with us, and I'm just gonna keep doing my daily routine, it doesn't matter. Until it started hitting them is whenever they started getting nervous, and that was what was cool to me, is that aspect of we don't care what happens until it directly involves us. That was cool to me. I really like that. But yeah, outside of that, I think that was everything pertaining to the series spoilers. If there's anything else, I will comment about it, because I think this video has gone on long enough. So go to the end of the video, and thanks for coming through and watching the video. So basically, to summarize my thoughts on this game, I feel like overall, if I played this game first and I didn't play the other games, I wouldn't have been as invested in this game, because there was a lot that I didn't like, as you can tell from this video. If you've gotten this far, by the way, thank you if you've listened to me ramble for this long. But I feel like this as a starting game, I can understand why people don't get into the series if they start with this game, and why they misinterpret a lot of stuff. And I feel like the only reason I was motivated to actually continue is, 1, because I was streaming it, 2, I know what was going on at Crossbell, and 3, I know what the rest of the series has in store. I feel like I wouldn't have played this game had I just known only this game, if that makes sense. So I think I'm gonna wrap this video up here. I have my playthrough of this game that I streamed on YouTube, and most likely if you're seeing this in the future or the far future, I'm either streaming one of the Cold Steel games, or I'm already done with those and they're on YouTube somewhere, so you can find all my playthroughs most likely. Anyone who's watching, thank you for watching me ramble. Like I just said, I probably have Trails content on the channel. If this is in the far future, I hope you watch it. If you're watching this and you haven't played the Trails games and you got this far, what are you doing? Stop it, go play the games. If you have played this game and you haven't played the rest of the series, play the rest of the series. And yeah, thanks for watching.